The relentless Arizona sun beat down on Serpent Pass, a treacherous, winding trail notorious for its rattlesnakes and unforgiving terrain. Marshal Jedediah "Jed" Stone, a man whose weathered face reflected years of chasing outlaws under a scorching sky, was on a grim errand. He was tracking a desperate plea from a dying prospector, Ezekiel "Zeke" Thorne, found barely alive by a passing Apache scout, his skin strangely withered, his eyes wide with a terror that transcended the physical. Zeke's last coherent words, whispered between labored breaths, spoke not of thirst or heatstroke, but of a singing cactus and voices in the spines that stole his life away. He pointed a trembling finger towards a remote, rarely traveled section of Serpent Pass, where a grove of ancient, towering saguaro cacti stood like silent, monstrous sentinels. Jed, a man of hard facts and frontier justice, dismissed the singing cactus as a dying man's delirium. Yet, the Apache scout's own unease, a quiet respect for the unknown that Jed had learned to trust, gave him pause. The scout spoke of old tribal warnings about that specific grove, tales of spirits trapped in the desert's giants. He rode into the designated area of Serpent Pass alone, the silence immediate and profound. No birds, no insects, just the eerie moan of the wind through the saguaro spines. The cacti themselves were unlike any he'd seen, immense, grotesque in their age, their arms twisted into unnatural, almost beckoning shapes. Their green skin, usually vibrant, seemed subtly dull, almost pale, as if something had drained their very essence. As he dismounted, his boots crunching on the dry earth, a faint, rhythmic humming seemed to emanate from the grove. It wasn't the hum of bees, but a low, resonant vibration that seemed to come from deep within the cacti themselves. And then, he heard them. Faint, sibilant whispers, too numerous to distinguish, seemingly carried on the desert breeze. They spoke in no language he knew, yet they filled his mind with an unsettling sense of longing and profound sorrow. He approached the largest saguaro, its scarred trunk thick as an oak. As he placed his hand on its cool, waxy surface, a sudden, intense cold radiated from within the cactus, far colder than the desert air. He felt a pervasive sense of dread, a chilling emptiness that tightened around his chest, making it hard to breathe. Suddenly, from within the saguaro, the humming intensified, growing into a low, resonant thrum that vibrated through the cactus's flesh and resonated in his very bones. The whispers swelled into a chilling chorus, now clearer, more distinct, seeming to form fragmented, desperate words. Taken, joins, ours. Jed gripped his rifle, his knuckles white. This was no delirium. This was something ancient, something that lured men to the saguaro grove and never let them go. And it was waiting for him. Jedediah Stone pulled his hand from the saguaro, the chilling cold clinging to his skin even after he stepped away. The humming intensified, a low, resonant thrum that permeated the entire grove, making the ground beneath his feet vibrate. The whispers swirled around him, a relentless chorus of sorrowful, longing voices, seeming to draw him deeper into the towering cacti. The oppressive cold of the grove was bone-deep, sucking the warmth from his body with each breath. His rifle felt heavy, useless, against an unseen enemy. He scanned the saguaro, looking for the source of the insidious power. He noticed that the spines on many of the cacti, usually sharp and formidable, seemed strangely brittle and almost translucent, as if their very essence had been drained. As he moved deeper into the grove, he began to see them, faint, shimmering forms within the very flesh of the saguaro. They were elongated, spectral figures, barely visible against the dull green skin of the cacti, twisting and writhing as if trapped within the plant's fibrous body. Their faces were distorted in silent anguish, their ethereal limbs reaching out. These were the missing prospectors, Zeke Thorne among them, and countless others, their life force somehow absorbed by the monstrous cacti. They were the source of the whispers, their ghostly forms begging for release. The humming intensified, now sounding almost like a mournful, ancient song. The whispers grew louder, clearer, no longer fragmented, but a chilling invitation. Stay, belong, become. The dull green skin of the saguaro began to pulse with a faint, internal sickly yellow light, and tendrils of ethereal energy seemed to reach out from the cacti towards Jed, trying to draw him in. He felt a pull, a strange sense of profound weariness, as if the cold and the whispers were slowly draining his will, tempting him to simply give in, to become one with the living desert giants. He gripped his rifle, its solid weight a stark contrast to the ethereal horror surrounding him. He knew now why no bodies were found. These men hadn't just died, they had been absorbed, their essence consumed by the saguaro. This was the singing cactus, a living, consuming entity that drained life from all who ventured too close. Jed realized this wasn't just a natural phenomenon. It was a curse, an ancient, malevolent force tied to these specific cacti. He had to find a way to break their hold, to shatter the very prison that held these trapped souls, or risk becoming another shimmering figure within the cold, yellow glow. He needed a weakness, a way to disrupt the very essence of the whispering cactus. Jedediah Stone fought against the overwhelming, draining lethargy that the pulsating saguaro and chilling whispers imposed. The spectral forms trapped within the cacti writhed, their silent anguish a powerful, beckoning force, threatening to pull him under. The humming of the grove resonated in his bones, a constant drone threatening to lull him into an eternal slumber. He knew he couldn't fight an ethereal entity with bullets, nor could he outrun a spiritual prison woven from the very fabric of the desert. He needed something else, something that could disrupt the life-draining essence of the whispering cactus. He remembered old Apache legends, tales of thunder iron or cold steel being able to ward off certain unholy things. It was a long shot, but it was all he had. He scanned the grove, his eyes darting across the ghostly forms within the saguaro and the pulsing yellow light emanating from their skin. His gaze fell upon a discarded prospector's camp, a small, hastily abandoned site near the center of the grove. Among the scattered tools and weathered supplies, he saw it. A heavy iron branding iron, exceptionally thick and long, its tip blackened from countless fires. It radiated a cold, inert energy, strikingly different from the chilling glow of the cacti. He lunged for the branding iron, ignoring the increased intensity of the whispers that screamed in his mind. As his fingers wrapped around the cold iron, he felt a faint jolt, a slight disruption in the overwhelming dread. The spectral forms in the cacti seemed to recoil slightly, and the yellow glow around him flickered. It was working. The iron, uncorrupted by the grove's essence, seemed to repel or disrupt the entities. He raised the heavy iron branding iron, its weight comforting in his hands. He looked at the largest, most vibrant saguaro, the one from which the strongest humming and whispering seemed to emanate. He had to strike at its heart, to shatter the very prison that held the countless souls. He aimed for a particularly large, brightly glowing section of its trunk, where the spectral forms seemed to be most concentrated. He swung the branding iron with all his might, bringing it down on the saguaro's waxy skin. The impact was horrifying. There was no sound of wood splintering, but a sickening, wet splash of pulpy flesh, followed by a raw, tearing of tortured energy, like countless voices ripping themselves apart. The entire grove flashed with an intense, blinding yellow light, momentarily overwhelming his senses. The humming of the cacti stopped abruptly, replaced by a sudden, jarring silence. The whispers transformed into a chaotic, piercing wail of pure agony and confusion, echoing from the wounded saguaro. The spectral forms within the cacti began to contort violently, their ethereal bodies rippling, dissolving, and reforming in chaotic bursts of light. He had struck a nerve, shattered the core of the whispering cactus's power. But the battle was far from over. The immense energy unleashed by his strike was destabilizing the entire grove. The ground beneath his feet began to tremble violently, and a deep, guttural groan echoed from the depths of the earth. The very air began to vibrate with a volatile energy. He knew he was running out of time. He had to finish this and get out before the grove consumed him too. Jedediah Stone continued his desperate assault on the glowing saguaro with the branding iron, each strike sending a wave of agony through the spiritual entities trapped within the cacti. The screeches of tortured energy and the chaotic wailing of the trapped souls filled the air, a cacophony of spectral pain that assaulted his very sanity. The entire grove pulsed with an erratic, blinding yellow light, alternating with oppressive darkness. The saguaro, ancient and massive, began to fight back in a different way. Its wounded trunk pulsed violently, and its remaining spines, now crackling with sickly yellow energy, seemed to elongate and sharpen, whipping through the air like poisoned spears, forcing Jed to dodge frantically while still swinging the heavy iron. The ground beneath his feet turned spongy in places, then instantly desiccated into fine powder. He could feel the very earth beneath the grove groaning, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the soles of his boots. The immense cacti began to sway unnaturally, their massive arms thrashing against each other, showering him with sharp, brittle spines and chunks of their pulpy flesh. The air grew thick with a fine, irritating dust and the sharp, acidic smell of raw cactus sap. He aimed for the largest remaining sections of the glowing yellow veins, bringing the iron branding iron down with desperate fury. With each shattering blow against the cactus, more of the trapped spectral forms seemed to dissolve into shimmering mist, their wails fading into nothingness. The power of the whispering cactus was diminishing, but its physical form was reacting with violent, dying throes. Suddenly, the saguaro he was attacking, its trunk split and glowing with internal light, let out a final horrifying scream, a sound that was both a tearing of plant fiber and the collective shriek of countless souls being released. The entire massive cactus exploded outward with a deafening crash, sending a shower of pulpy flesh, sharp spines, and glowing fragments in every direction. Jedediah threw himself to the ground, shielding his head, as the very heart of the grove's malevolence disintegrated. When the blinding flash subsided, and the ringing in his ears began to fade, Jedediah slowly pushed himself up, bruised and battered. The grove was silent. The oppressive cold had vanished, replaced by the natural, warm air of the desert. The horrifying whispers were gone, leaving behind only the echoing sound of falling debris. The whispering cactus, the source of the grove's power, was gone. Its essence was dispersed, its hold broken. But the victory was short-lived. The destruction of the massive saguaro had destabilized the very ground. The earth beneath his feet began to tremble violently, and a deep, guttural groan echoed from the depths of Serpent Pass. The ground around the disintegrated cactus began to sink inward, forming a rapidly deepening sinkhole. Jedediah knew he had to get out. He had defeated the monster, but now the very ground was trying to swallow him. He looked frantically for an escape. He saw a faint glimmer of daylight in the distance, towards the canyon rim. He grabbed his rifle, its weight a familiar comfort, and began to run, scrambling over the rapidly shifting ground, the roar of the collapsing earth chasing him, echoing the last dying screams of the whispering saguaro. Jedediah Stone ran, fueled by pure adrenaline, the ground beneath his feet shaking violently as the sinkhole expanded behind him. The air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of disturbed earth. He could feel the vast, ancient power of Serpent Pass reacting to the destruction of the whispering cactus, the earth itself groaning with a primal, hungry sound. He scrambled over loose rocks and jagged outcroppings, his lungs burning, his heart hammering against his ribs. The growing sinkhole rapidly devoured the ground, swallowing cacti, rocks, and sections of the canyon floor with a terrifying, silent efficiency. He could hear the deep, echoing thump of massive sections of earth caving in behind him. Just as he thought he might make it to the relative safety of higher ground, the earth directly in front of him cracked violently, and a new fissure opened up, wide and deep, cutting off his path to the canyon rim. He skidded to a halt, cursing under his breath. He was trapped between the expanding sinkhole and a new, impassable chasm. Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but his years on the frontier had forged him into a man who did not easily surrender. He scanned the edges of the new fissure, looking for any weakness, any narrow point, any hope. He spotted a precarious-looking rock bridge, barely wide enough for him to balance on, spanning a particularly narrow section of the fissure. It was a terrifying gamble. He took a deep breath, sucked in the dusty air, and began to cross the unstable rock bridge, his movements slow and deliberate, each step a carefully calculated risk. Below him, the darkness of the fissure seemed to pulse with an unseen hunger, ready to swallow him whole. Behind him, the sinkhole continued its relentless expansion, its hungry maw now directly at the edge of the first fissure he had to cross. He could hear the terrifying sound of the earth tearing itself apart, a monstrous ripping that echoed through the canyon. He was running on borrowed time. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he pushed himself across the last few feet of the precarious bridge and scrambled onto solid ground on the other side. He was out. He was alive. He lay there for a moment, gasping, coughing up dust. He looked back at the canyon. The sinkhole had now completely swallowed the saguaro grove, leaving a massive, gaping hole in the earth. The fissure he had crossed was widening, and more sections of the canyon were beginning to crumble. Serpent Pass, for now, was a place of seismic chaos, its ancient peace shattered. Jedediah slowly pushed himself up, his body bruised, battered, and covered in grime. He looked at the vast, violent canyon, now bathed in the soft light of the rising moon. The oppressive dread was gone. The chilling cold had dissipated. The only sound was the deep, echoing rumble of the earth as it settled. He had faced the terrifying secrets of the whispering cactus, and he had emerged victorious, though forever marked by what he had witnessed. Marshal Jedediah Stone left the now-scarred Serpent Pass, leaving its dangerous new features to the forces of time and the elements. He rode hard until he reached the nearest town, reporting a localized earthquake that had caused a massive sinkhole and altered the canyon's landscape. He kept the true tale of the singing cactus and the trapped souls to himself, a grim secret he knew no one would believe, and few would ever want to hear. Serpent Pass remained a place of grim legend, its new, dangerous landscape solidifying its reputation as a place to be avoided. The whispers of the saguaro were silenced, their life-draining curse banished. No more prospectors or travelers disappeared without a trace in that particular section of the canyon. Jedediah, though he survived, was forever changed. The horrors of the whispering cactus had etched themselves into his soul. He found himself more solitary than ever, seeking solace in the vast, empty spaces of the desert, but with a new, quiet respect for its hidden powers. He carried the memory of the spectral forms, their silent pleas, and the agonizing shriek as they were shattered. He learned to trust his intuition more than ever, especially when faced with an unnatural silence or an inexplicable cold. He eventually retired from martial duties, finding a quiet life in a small cabin on the edge of the true wilderness. He spent his days watching the vast plains, his eyes always scanning the horizon, forever vigilant. He knew that the West held endless secrets, some of them terrifying, some of them ancient. But he also knew that even in the face of unspeakable evil, there was a power that could push back the darkness, a cleansing force hidden deep within the heart of the world. And sometimes, it took a man like him to find it, and unleash its force against the silence of death. Sometimes, on cold, still nights, when the wind moaned just so through the distant canyons, Jedediah would swear he could hear a faint, distant humming, or a fleeting whisper carried on the wind. It was a ghost of a sound, a memory that would send a shiver down his spine. But it was just that, a ghost, not a threat. The whispering cactus's power was broken, its dark essence contained. Jedediah Stone lived out his days as a quiet, watchful man, a hidden guardian of the frontier's untold horrors. He was a testament to survival, a man who had faced the unexplainable and walked away, forever carrying the burden and the unique wisdom of the whispers from the ghost mine, and the scream of the whispering cactus. He continued his silent vigil, watching over the vast, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying Wild West.